What is StoryCon? Welcome back to Coffee with the Authors. I'm Mark Parsons. This is Wendelin Van Draanen. We are traditionally published authors here to talk about the craft and business of writing. And really what we're going to talk about is the craft and business of traveling to a conference. We just got back from a little week mini kind of book tour, including several events, but the main one, kind of the anchor point, was the StoryCon conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. StoryCon is a conference that features over 3,000 attendees and maybe 100 authors, and it has a giant hall where they have lots of booths like a typical convention, and the focus of it really is classes for writers, and there are many different classes at all ages and all ability levels of writing for the attendees to attend.
For the attendees to attend.
What really makes it all possible are the staff and all of the volunteers who make this actually happen. They were all really friendly, super helpful. Many times we'd have questions, we'd just go find somebody in either a blue staff shirt or a yellow volunteer shirt and ask them. And almost always they would either give us the answer or they knew where to get the answer. It takes a whole lot of organization to put on something this big.
It was held at the Salt Palace. Now, I'd never been to the Salt Palace, so I had this picture in my mind of, something sort of crystalline, like salt molecules. Although I knew that would get washed away in the rain. But, but this venue was neither a palace nor anything remotely salt-like, unless there's a lot of salt and cement.
No crystals were
to
be had.
And so at first I was like, what is this place? And then it turns out it's just this oddly laid out convention center. You do start to feel like a little author in a maze, because there are 3 levels, only 3, it feels like 7. And they're escalators and they're stairs, that's normal, but it's all like, go down this hall does not connect to that hall, and you got to find your way. So it was kind of complicated, and they had the 100 block, the 200 block, the 300 block. So the code, was easy to break, but then and the signage was good too. But just finding your way through the maze of the Salt Palace was a new experience. I had never been to a convention hall like that before. And it turns out that next year the StoryCon's going to be held elsewhere because they're doing some major renovation. So I just hope they
Hopefully they connect
the maze in certain places.
The floor plan. Yeah.
All the maze aside, the main showroom, though, was pretty typical of a conference center. So there's this the big space that the vendors set up booths, and you've got decorated booths for either a particular author or a bookstore or merchandise that people are selling. And there's a food court, and there's lots of people milling around and going from one thing to the next, like a typical conference.
But unlike a typical conference, they had, for example, they had a jousting arena. They had this whole area at the back of the expo hall, kind of fenced off with rails. It was like a boxing rink, only 6 times as big. And they would have these kind of cosplay warrior men and women with swords, and those were metal swords. I don't know how sharp they were, but they were clanking away and fighting, and they had an announcer there, just talking about what's going on. And that was great fun. The interesting focus here, it's focused on aspiring writers, but it's also focused on largely fantasy. Either fantasy fans, fantasy readers, fantasy authors. The keynote speaker was Brandon Sanderson, who obviously is a huge fantasy author, which that kind of tells you about what the draw of the conference is.
Right.
But they actually had something for everybody.
Yeah. So a super fun part of the conference was actually the way they kicked it off. So all the authors lined up, and then we all got in a little duckling row, and then we went up to the front of the stage, and we walked across the stage to the really raucous cheering and hooting and hollering and clapping of the audience members. It really kind of charged you up and gave you that energy that you were going to need for the next 2 days as you got through all your sessions and everything else.
And you have this massive PA, and you have massive lights, and there are 3,000 or 4,000 cheering people as you walk across the stage. It is literally like being at a rock show, being on stage. And it just gives you a lot of energy at the beginning of the conference to kick it off.
Yeah.
So the very first item on our agenda, which actually Wendelin's item, was she taught a class for a group of tweens, or 3 groups of tweens, that they kind of bust in. And the classroom was actually 2 rooms. They moved the wall and they had 2 large rooms, and they were about 200 seats in the room. And she taught this class 3 times in a row, 30-minute class.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it's like 30 minutes, 15 off, 30 on, 15 off, 30 on, 15 off. 200 kids each time. So she got to address about 600 kids in a couple hours. And the funny thing was the kids would all kind of fight to sit at the front.
Yeah.
And then later on, we each taught adult classes, and the adults would kind of fight to sit at the back, and you'd have to kind of tell them, I'm a drummer, I can't hear, you need to come forward or whatever, because they're in this big room, big crowds, and they want to sit far away from you.
They want the escape hatch, how you want to pick an aisle seat and you want to have it near the back. So if you decide that this speaker is boring, you can just kind of sneak out. So that's the adult strategy. But with the kids are always so awesome. They are so excited. Talk about little ducklings. I mean, they're so excited and they want to be up front. They want to get, the spitting, the spitting experience.
They want to see you go airborne. They were very enthusiastic.
That was neat.
That was a great way to kick off the conference for us.
One kind of unique thing that I did was participate in the educator breakfast. So the educator breakfast is held in a banquet room, and the breakfast was really nice, but we didn't have a lot of time to eat it because the way that it is run is the 10 authors who are sponsored by their publisher, and the latest copy or whatever book they're promoting at the conference has been supplied by the publisher, so that each educator that has bought a ticket to this breakfast gets a bag of 10 books. So what they do is they have tables with 9 educators in a table and 1 empty chair. So it's a 10-person table. And when the clock starts, you go, and it's like speed dating. You go around to each one of these tables and you give a 5-minute spiel, or you talk to them for 5 minutes about whatever you want to talk about. Presumably you want to talk about the book that the publisher has donated so that people are aware of what it's about. So I had counted out bookmarks for 9 people and flyers for 9 people, so I could pass those out really quickly. And then I talked about The Steps, which was the book that I was there for. And I talked about the upcoming book called Ghosted, which is also being published by the same publisher, to kind of seed the idea that this is a book that they really want to look at come October when it comes out. So in 5 minutes, you've got to, pitch the book, pitch the other book, explain why it is you do what you do, because I have a purpose for, why I write what I write. And then ding, it's time to go to the next table, and off you go to the next one, and you kind of do that whole thing all over again. By the time you get to the 10th table, you are totally frazzled. Your handouts are no longer counted out the way they were supposed to be. You're just like, blah.
Like what?
Blah.
Blah.
So, but it was an awesome experience because, I used to be a teacher, so I got to talk to teachers, and I always loved that. And then, you find people's reactions to what it is, the purpose for what it is you do, and also the books that you have that you've given, you're prepared a little pitch for, that they've responded well to that. So you leave feeling like it was time really well spent, and then you report back to your publisher that it was money really well spent too.
Probably my favorite presentation that I gave at StoryCon was this thing called The Power of Art, and that was largely to adults, and it had to do with kind of the fact that art is not just entertaining and fun, but it's actually very powerful. There's a lot of horsepower tied up in creativity, and I actually used the cajon as a teaching tool, just briefly for about 5 minutes in the middle of that, but it always wakes people up, and they always love to see live music being performed. I made sure I had it really cranked up loud through the PA. But mostly it's discussion and a little Q&A at the end, and I seemed to get a really good response from the audience, and that seemed to be a very worthwhile use of my time.
And this was also a really good example of the staff helping out, because Mark's requirements for playing a musical instrument, not typical of what the the average author was presenting there. So we needed to get it mic'd up. There were
right. They were the tech staff and the volunteer staff working for the conference were both very helpful. And I needed a mic stand and some other things to make it all work, things I didn't have with me. And they grabbed that stuff, no problem. And everything worked out fine.
Yeah. So that was our little overview of what it was like to participate in StoryCon or any conference, really. And we hope that you found it useful. As always, we're happy to answer your questions that you leave in the comments. So we hope that you'll talk to us, because we're happy to talk back.
And coming up soon, we'll have a video about things you should definitely do and not do when you're presenting at a conference. Until then,
dream big, work hard, don't give up.
Go to conferences, have fun, and keep writing.
Wait, sorry.
No,
A worthwhile waste of my time. Okay.
Kind of.
Sorry. Go ahead.